Okay, everybody, it's a short break that we just took, but we are going to get started so we can stay on track and get everybody to lunch at a decent hour. So if everybody could just take a seat, that'd be great. We have a wonderful panel up next about urban mobility. And we'll wait another minute till everybody just gets a chance to settle. It's great that there's a lot of connecting going on in the room. Okay, so Suzanne Rasmussen is the moderator of our Urban Mobility panel, I'm calling it for short. And Suzanne is the director of Environmental and Transportation Planning Division for the City of Cambridge. She's responsible for the city's efforts, and I should say Cambridge, Massachusetts. You may have guessed that, where we are right now. She's responsible for the city's efforts to reduce greenhouse gas emissions and for programs to engage residents and businesses in this effort. And she also oversees the implementation of new transportation policies and projects such as large multimodal roadway projects, traffic calming, and transportation demand management. And Cambridge, as we all know, is a leader in many areas. So I'm happy to have Suzanne moderating this panel and hearing what she's up to. Thanks, Suzanne.
Good afternoon, everybody. It's a great pleasure for me to be here. In the city, we've been working very actively on sustainable transportation for at least 20 years. And as we became to understand that climate change is indeed happening, our efforts have broadened very quickly into the field of energy efficiency and renewable energy. And one of the most exciting things that are happening in our community right now is that we have set a goal to become a net zero community as far as building emissions go, and we're working on fleshing out strategies over the course of this year. But that's not why I'm here today. According to a recent study that was published by Arthur D. Little in collaboration with the International Association of Public Transport, in a business as usual scenario, by 2050, 67% of the world's population will live in urban areas. Urban mobility mobility systems will use 17.3% of the planet's biocapacities, and that's 5 times more than 1990. So in a very short period of time, transportation is really consuming a huge amount of biocapacity. And not only that, the urban city dweller is expected to spend something like over 100 hours per week sitting in a traffic jam. So that's 2050 business as usual. So the choices that we make about our transportation systems and how we travel in cities are obviously going to have a huge impact on how cities grow and what the patterns and what the urban form will be. So in this panel, we're going in several different ways, going to explore the evolution of transportation options, looking at new technologies, new systems like car sharing, bike sharing, mass transit, and also greening of the energy supply for transportation uses, and what that does to land use and growth patterns. And in turn, we're looking at how these changes would enable us to reduce the amount of energy consumed by the transportation sector, and therefore, of course, also reduce the greenhouse gas emissions contributed by the transportation sector. And the transportation sector has been one of the very hard sectors to tackle in terms of greenhouse gas emissions reduction goals all over the world. Even very progressive cities like Copenhagen, where I spend a lot of time, transportation is a huge challenge. And we have some excellent panelists here who will help think through what the 2050 future will look like. So what we're going to do is hear from the 3 panelists, and then we'll have a little conversation amongst ourselves, and then we'll turn it over to Q&A with you. But let me quickly introduce the panelists, and I'm sure you will be as impressed as I am with what these women have accomplished in their careers and what they bring to this discussion. Starting with Dr. Catherine Ross, immediately to my right. Catherine is an internationally recognized expert on mega cities, transportation systems planning, urban planning, and quality growth. She currently directs Georgia Tech's Center for Quality Growth and Regional Development, and she's a professor in the School of City and Regional Planning at the College of Architecture at Georgia Tech. She's had many accomplishments in the past. I'll just mention a few. She has served as the first executive director of the Georgia Regional Transportation Authority and also founded her own transportation research consulting company. Catherine has served on numerous national academies, including the Transportation Research Board Executive Committee, and in 2009 she was selected to advise the Obama administration on the first ever White House Office of Urban Affairs. She's published extensively on transportation planning and public participation, and she has a book out just this April on health impact assessment in the United States. So thank you for participating, Catherine. Next to Catherine is Shelley Poticha. She's Director of Urban Solutions Program at the National Resource Defense Council, NRDC, in Washington. The NRDC is one of the nation's most powerful environmental groups with, and maybe more now, but at least 1.4 million members. And the Urban Solutions Program that Shelley directs promotes transportation choices through mobility options, scaling up building energy efficiency programs, creating model green and equitable neighborhoods, creating sustainable food systems, green infrastructure, and working on climate preparedness. Shelley has been, even in her past, a longtime partner of NRDC in a lot of their initiatives around transportation policy forum, the development of the LEED neighborhood development rating system, and the creation of Smart Growth America. She came to NRDC from HUD, where she was a senior advisor and director of the Office of Sustainable Housing and Communities. And before joining HUD, Shelley was the president of CEO of Reconnecting America, where she was a national leader in promoting reform of land use and transportation planning. And she also served as the executive director of the Congress for a New America. And last but not least is Sonia Hamel. Sonia is a climate protection consultant. She consults to foundations, nonprofits, and governments in the areas of climate change, energy, and transportation policy. For example, right now she's working on a study to design a carbon tax for Massachusetts and working with Northeast states on ways of reducing emissions from the transportation sector. Sonia has worked on climate change since 1994, when she was appointed to the White House Advisory Committee on Transportation and Greenhouse Gas Emissions. She's had a long career with the Commonwealth of Massachusetts for about 3 decades, where she was coordinating around air quality, energy, and climate protection programs, including notably the very successful Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative, which is a regional cap and trade program for the electric sector in the Northeast. Also, while Sonia was at the state, she wrote and developed the Massachusetts Climate Protection Plan and helped launch the National Carbon Registry. And finally, she was instrumental in developing the nation's first regulations for carbon regulations and was the chief coordinator for the New England Governors and Eastern Canadian Premiers Climate Action Plan all the way back in 2001, when very few people were focused on climate change. So with that, we'll jump into the presentations, and we'll have some conversation with you later. Catherine?
Good morning. Thank you, Suzanne, for that introduction. Clean energy mobility in the shape of future cities. what might we expect? If you look at the proliferation of sort of disruptive innovation recently, what we know is that what we know will change. So I had the opportunity yesterday to sit in on the lightning presentations. I thought they were outstanding. And each of the young ladies talked about innovation, technological innovation, and the opportunities and challenges that they present. But our challenge really is, how do you make all of that work together? And so the idea that I'm putting forth is that we really need an industrial revolution of sorts, that it has to be this sort of transformative undertaking that links a technology in a systematic, networked perspective, particularly because that's what drives our transport system. So what are the characteristics? They're the ones we've been talking about. Conservation, of course, efficiency, and reduced carbon energy sources. Transport future, asking for it all. Close your eyes and imagine a transportation system that operates 100% on renewable energy sources. If we talk about what our future looks like, it seems to me that's a worthwhile undertaking and something we ought to set as our end. And we all know the challenges between where we are now and what I've just talked about. I think that doesn't make it any less urgent. In fact, I would suggest it makes it more urgent. So let me put that on the table. But more critically, think of you and I providing power to that grid. So just like suppliers do, we began to energize, become more efficient. It creates a more active society, if you will. And that's how you transform things. Everybody has to have a stake in the game. This bi-directional concept of fueling our energy sources and subsequently our mobility systems is one way to move toward this society, this idyllic society that I'm putting on the table for us to think about. So let's talk a bit about low carbon transportation modes. We all know them. I put them up because I feel compelled to do so. It is all the discussion now, and I'm sure none of the other panelists will talk about that. I will reference just two of those. The category that really isn't up here that I care the most about is something I call new modes, because I think those are ours to develop. And new modes can be new technology, new modes, or it can be the integration of old modes. So keep that in mind as we talk about it. And I would suggest that public transportation in the future should be 60 to 75% of all our trips. You don't get that hardly anywhere in 2 cities in the US right now, maybe. So again, I'm putting forth sort of worthwhile notions about mobility in our future, mobility in terms of transport systems. The other challenge that we have is all of this has to work to enhance quality of life. We're not doing this to be miserable. We're doing it so people will continue to want to come. They'll want to live in the communities that we create. The other responsibility is we got to be economically competitive. I mean, we can be Pollyanna about that, but people have to have jobs and way to sustain themselves, their families, on an ongoing basis. So this notion that we're embracing in terms of our low carbon future has to be one that recognizes, I suspect, I know as a matter of fact, the idea that we create quality of life in places that are really attractive to live in. Low carbon energy sources, we've heard a lot about that, and I put some up. We have some ones looming in the backdrop with lots of questions. Hydrogen would be one of those. I'm going to talk a lot about the smart grid because I think it has the most benefit for transport systems. I'm becoming an avid supporter of that, mostly because I think it's scalable. It goes from your community to the global markets. It works very well. And so the smart grid in terms of transport systems technology is one that offers us opportunities that other sources do not. And again, this idea of scalability is really, really important. I'll reference a little bit an occurrence we have in Atlanta where Georgia Tech is located. We have something called the Midtown Alliance, which is concentrated about 7 to 8 miles north of our central business district. They've laid fiber everywhere, and the kind of growth that we've seen using information systems, low carbon options has been just phenomenal. So because they're beginning to grid it and being able to take advantage of lots of other economies of scales and technologies that get linked by virtue of that. So this idea of the smart grid, I think, holds a lot of potential with regard to a transport system. The other thing that it does, and I'll talk a little bit about this, is you've heard a lot about connected cars. I make the argument we're talking about connected technologies. That's where I started when I referenced the lightning presentations. So again, it gives us the potential to talk about connecting lots of technologies, lots of modes, but connected cars are really a challenge. I'm on the board of directors for the Auto Club Group, AAA. And one of the challenges is connected cars now are going to tell you so much information. You don't need AAA to tell you when you're going to break down. Your engine will do that for you. It'll tell you. So this idea, again, just an illustration of the kinds of opportunities I think that are in front of us. There is a new master. It's called the global economy. And our transport system has to serve it. We, I think, have neglected that. We're behind globally, internationally, I can tell you, in that regard. So you see a new resurgence on ports and connections and all the things that they can do because they resurrect themselves in the global economy. Cities are complex systems. The transportation system is a networked system. We don't plan it like that, but it really is. And those are the opportunities that we have for our cities of the future as I sort of think about it. And what I like to think about is now we've got to link urban economies, transportation behavior, and network science. It's got to go for neighborhoods, cities, regions, our country, and global markets. Quite a lofty undertaking. And if you ask me to give you one word that resonates for me in that regard, it would be fluidity. I think that's where we're trying to get. And I would put that past integrated technologies in a way. We get to integrated technologies, and then fluidity is, I think, the ultimate benefit that we gain. We have a new project in Atlanta. It's called the Atlanta Beltline. And what we've done is to take 22 miles of an abandoned railroad. It really circumvents our central business district about 4 or 5 miles beyond the CBD, and it goes around. And it is really going to be a redevelopment project. It's going to be networked. We'll have fiber on it, new transit, residential, commercial, retail. And it really is changing the face of our city. So this idea of redeveloping our cities, we've got to do that because we've married the automobile to our detriment. So as we redevelop our cities, the kinds of opportunities we're talking about now will be ahead of us. And this Beltline is just one example, and we have lots of them going on now, Spain, Madrid. They really talks about how you reinvent the core of the city as a way to energize it. Tremendous opportunities for low carbon energy sources in that regard. The other work that I've been doing is pushing this idea of mega regions, which is sort of connected places at a regional scale. Right now, we plan transport systems on a microscopic level. The global market says you need a technology, a geography. I'm suggesting mega regions is that, which connects multiple states, multiple technologies, ignores state lines. That's the kind of perspective we need on a going forward basis with respect to transportation systems of the future. So the idea of the smart grid, I'll make just one observation. It's a way to control a lot of the sources that we're talking about. When you look at solar and wind, we need mechanisms to sort of control those because, as you know, they're not always available in some instances. So this idea of advanced computerized energy management systems is something that the grid would give us as well. In conclusion, let me simply say that whether we're talking about the smart grid investment or other investments relative to transport, the idea of linking economics, energy efficiency, and health, one of the opportunities we have now in terms of greening a lot of these places that are now barren or they're concrete, and doing some travel diets, road diets, if you will. There are roadway systems that we don't need anymore. They don't function in the way we've supplanted them in many ways. So we have the opportunity to redevelop our cities in the ways that we've talked about today, reduce travel costs, travel time, and enhance environmental impacts. Thank you so much for your time.
Hi. Thank you. Yeah. Good morning, everyone. It is, or almost afternoon. It's really nice to be here, and wow, a little daunting to follow Catherine, who has been a leader in this field. She's always like 2 steps ahead of all of us, which is exactly what we need to urge us on to be the cutting edge. So thank you, Catherine. I want to talk a little bit about some work that we're now doing at the Natural Resources Defense Council and our focus on people and cities, which is a new thing for a major environmental organization. I think many of you may be aware that we have a big team working on the response to the EPA's carbon pollution standards, which I know we've been talking about here. But one of the things that we're also really getting focused on is the way that cities really have to play a role in creating our sustainable future. And so part of what I want to talk about here echoes some of what Dr. Ross mentioned, but also urge us to think about the way that we build our cities and the land use within them, the transportation connections as an energy conservation strategy that can also help meet some of these larger goals that we're talking about in the carbon pollution standards and in other locations. We just heard a little bit about this in the introduction, but we are increasingly a metropolitan world. And we have been building in ways that deliver. It has been very effective, but in fact, we're seeing a lot of the negative results from that. Loss of farmland, unbelievable traffic, disinvestment in cities. We could kind of go on and on and on. People living in harm's way from major climate events. And frankly, we've built in a pattern that is extraordinarily expensive for the people who live in it. And so part of what we're trying to do with this Urban Solutions group is to promote the strategies that help us get to a different future. NRDC, as you know, is a long-standing environmental advocacy organization. One of the things that I think isn't well known is that people and places have been part of our work for almost 40 years. And part of what we're trying to do now is really bring that together, bring it into a coordinated team that can partner with communities to help them take some of the techniques, tools, best practices that we know are effective and work with the marketplace and deliver the benefits that we're looking at. Help communities access those techniques, implement them more quickly. I really feel like we've got to step up our game. So our focus is really kind of two points. One is as our organization's big priority, we're really looking at climate change and the implications of that. But we also believe that we cannot do this and do it effectively unless we're working for everyone in our communities. And I think often what we see as we look at cities revitalizing, changing, we're seeing the benefits accrue to the elite. And in fact, we need to be thinking about benefits accruing to everyone. And so our focus is going to be ensuring that the people who really can benefit the most from the cost savings, the getting out of harm's way, the improving their livability and access to job opportunities, that they're really part of that solution. Now, I've been in this space for a very long time. We have seen throughout our movement a tremendous amount of research, many best practices, lots and lots of pilots, some communities that have really led the way. Cambridge and this net zero strategy is incredibly exciting. We know that we can see improved outcomes from revitalizing cities by retrofitting suburbs so that they're walkable and transit connected and have local services. We know the techniques and tools to make our buildings as energy efficient as possible. And we know that when we do that, we get tremendous benefits. And my favorite one on this list is if you build a neighborhood that's connected, walkable, accessible, you're going to lose weight. So, but we have some barriers. We have to start confronting the fact that working on this incremental piece-by-piece scale is insufficient. We're not going to get there. We're not going to get there fast enough. And this is just a chart that I like to use that shows this sort of blue-gray part of the wedge. This is the wedge that we've been talking about in the transportation sector among all of us kind of energy nerds. What it's really going to take is focusing more on reducing the amount of vehicle miles traveled, the amount of travel that we are doing in order to reach these broad goals. I think we've got to step up in this space. We are not working together as much as we should be, and I would love to partner with absolutely anybody in this room to see if we can make the way we travel in our communities a core part of the discussion about energy conservation and climate. Now, we have a really big challenge ahead because, like it or not, most of America looks like this. And this is appalling. You are not going to get people walking, taking transit, doing errands on the way to work and connecting trips if the physical environment of the places that we live in is so awful. And so we have to step up and look at ways that we really pay attention to both revitalizing the urban cores, which often have the great bones that can just be refilled, but taking on some of these harder places. I want to talk just a minute or a few minutes about an example that I think maybe brings together the energy challenges and the land use and transportation community in a way that I think maybe be a model for the rest of the country. Many of you I know have heard about the work in California. It's called Senate Bill 375 and its companion that really said we're going to cut carbon pollution by 80% in 2020, and we're going to set targets for each of our major metropolitan areas. Each region will have to develop a plan that shows how they're going to meet those targets. They're going to have to use data to deliver that. They can look at all kinds of different strategies, but this work will replace the regional transportation plan and the investment plans for each of those regions. This is a project that aggregates all of those regional plans up to the state of California, where they looked at two scenarios, the business as usual scenario and what they're calling the growing smart scenario, which essentially said, we need to grow more compactly. We need to focus intensive development, those mixed-use walkable places around our transit network. We need to provide layers of mobility options, as Catherine was saying. Let's see if that gets us to this large carbon goal. And these are just some slides of the scenarios that responded to many of the concerns of the people who were in communities interested in this work. So California really loves its nature, and it has a tremendous agricultural industry, so much less land consumed if we grow in the way that clusters development more sensibly in existing cities. The amount of travel we'll be doing, vehicle miles traveled, is significantly lower. We're going to save a tremendous amount of energy if we grow in this way. Really remarkable number there. We're going to save money. Municipalities, which are broke in most communities, this is a really key metric. We're going to save money, use our tax dollars more wisely, and we're going to save households money. The two, maybe the three biggest costs: car ownership and mobility, energy use, housing costs, tremendous impact on household budgets. Just housing and transportation alone in many of those suburban communities that I showed the picture of is edging close to 70% of a household budget. Add energy on top of that, and you're basically leaving almost no money for food and healthcare. So this is an issue that really resonates with consumers. And it showed that when we grow in smarter ways, we're helping to really offset the greenhouse gas emissions that are needed in order to meet that big goal. It's still going to take the power plants. It's still going to take a move to electric vehicles. But the contribution from integrating land use and transportation is significant. We're also seeing the data starting to emerge around health indicators: fewer asthma-related emergency room visits, fewer people at risk from water inundation from flooding if we grow in careful ways. So I raise this to say these are choices that we can make, and we actually know how to do it. The other part about the narrative of this work in California is that the growing smart alternative is exactly aligned with the demographic changes coming to that state, where people are looking for smaller housing units. They're not as attracted to the big mansion out at the periphery of the region where you have to drive for every single trip. They want to be near and close to services. They want to be able to be part of a community rather than a subdivision. And so what the Growing Smart scenario did was that it actually took the real estate market projection and put it on California and showed that business as usual is actually counter to the market. So the more that we can talk about these connections, the more that we can relate these issues to the issues that people care about in their everyday lives, I think we're going to get there. And I think that I have a lot of confidence that after years of trial and error, after years of lack of data, we now have the data, the tools, the techniques that in many cases need to be rolled out, scaled up, and executed throughout our country, and do it in a way that resonates with the specialness of every community, but at the same time gets us closer and faster to this larger goal. Thank you very much.
You do my slides for me? This is fun. I'm looking out on this audience, and I know a lot of you from different places in life. And what a great group of people. So I'm going to talk a little bit about how Massachusetts has been doing in trying to, you've just heard about California and the ambitions there. Ever since I left Massachusetts government, I've spent my time doing a lot of different work with many different states, but part of my fun, I guess I get to do this as as a previous employee of the Commonwealth when I couldn't say what I really thought, is to be kind of a gadfly, a critic, a little nudge, sometimes a cheerleader. And so I'll give you my sense of how things are going in the Commonwealth. And I guess I want to start by saying the transportation system and the transportation sector around energy is really unexplored in some ways. Considering the energy use of the transportation sector, there's not even within the transportation agencies, they don't, until very recently, didn't even ever measure it. It wasn't a thing that they cared about. What they cared about, not criticizing them at all, their job was to make sure people could get to work, that roads weren't too crowded, there were enough services, that the transit system worked. Very important things, bridges didn't fall down, but the embedded energy use and the decisions that they were making has not been measured until very recently. And I think one of the great things that the Patrick administration has done here is to say,
we need to care about this. This is actually, we're making commitments every day to the amount of future energy use by the transportation decisions that we're making. And I don't know if that's clear, yeah. So actually one exciting thing that's coming out, it's being reviewed right now, I think it's going to happen, is a review in the transportation agencies. Actually, it's going to be DEP, Department of Environmental Protection regulation, that requires greenhouse gases to be measured in new transportation projects. Not to say that something that's bad for greenhouse gases can't happen, but to know overall what the impact is of any set year's worth of new programs. And that's really new. Like, that's never been done before. And the scale and the pace of what has to happen to meet our climate change goals is so fast that I feel like the poor transportation agencies are kind of being dragged along by things changing very quickly. But they're stepping up. They're really stepping up. They've brought a lot of new people into the agency, and I'll tell you a little bit more about what they're doing. This is just a very simple chart to show sort of where we think, where the potential energy savings are. It's where energy is used in the transportation sector, and we generally have been focusing on the technology, and that is where the big reductions are happening. The federal standards, the electrification of the transportation system. I loved your vision of the by flow of the energy being used in the transportation system, of using the vehicles as batteries. I've just had several meetings with utilities, and they're on it. They're really excited about it. I think they've finally gotten that this is something that's going to help them deal with renewables, and it's going to help them deeply deal with some of the issues around smart grid. And they're seeing an opportunity all of a sudden that's new and fun. For them, it's good it'll be good for their bottom line. But I think it's also, for the first time, I'm kind of getting hope that electric vehicles are actually going to be a big part of the future, maybe the whole of the future story. In Massachusetts, this is pretty standard certainly for all the Northeast. We do have a lot of heating and building energy use, but this is our greenhouse gas profile for Massachusetts. And as you can see, transportation's the biggest part. Up until recently, it was growing faster than any other sector. The vehicle miles of travel, the amount that people travel, has leveled off, both nationally and in Massachusetts for the first time in 100 years. It used to grow 2% a year, 2.2% a year, no matter what. Some of the softening in BMT growth has been the economy, but much of it has not been. Much of it's actually real changes in terms of how people think about, work at home. Amazon probably helps. You're able to get information without necessarily going to meet directly, conference calling. Think about it just in your careers, how much more we do things on the phone or online. And all of that represents travel that doesn't need to happen. This is the reduction requirement. So the Massachusetts, similar to California, has big, meaty reduction goals. And, it really is a credit to both the legislature and to Governor Patrick, who was very brave in setting what's called the Global Warming Solutions Act here. It's a similar name in many other states. It sets big, deep goals, and while the federal government was not taking much action, the state did. The requirement, there was a requirement for setting a 2020 goal where the state actually set it was at a 25% reduction from 1990 baseline to 2020. That's really hard. That's fast and hard to make that kind of change. And then the long-term goal that the legislature set was to get to an 80% reduction by over 1990 by 2050. So that's decarbonizing the whole economy. I mean, that's really hard. There's nobody in the state who knows how that's going to happen yet. But that's the goal. And having, it's like throwing your hat across a fence and then figuring out how you're going to get there. Instead of, it really needs that kind of setting the goal and saying, like, everything we're doing now is going to align. And the transportation agencies didn't quite know how to do that yet. I'm going to show you what their first attempts look like. So I'm going to talk for a minute about the short term, the 2020 goal, and what the state thinks. So this was the climate plan that was passed after 2 years after the legislature set these goals as to how to make this 25% reduction. And you'll see that the things that are in green are certainly happening. The things that are in yellow are sort of happening. And the things that are in, they were red on my thing, I guess they're red up there, need some more work. So we're not at 2025 yet, but they have to really engage. And a few of them actually can. They're like things that can engage quickly. And we can talk about this chart in more depth later if you want to, but I just want to focus on the middle band, which is all the transportation stuff. And the state said out of the 25% reduction that they were going to do, that they would get almost 8% of that reduction out of the transportation system. Some of that was easy because they could get quite a bit. You'll see that big box on the bottom, that green box. That's both the federal car standards and also the fact that Massachusetts has followed the California car standards, including the zero emission vehicle standards for many, many years. And it's California's leadership and Massachusetts and New York and Vermont's ability to kind of keep the Northeast together that's meant that we get those reductions. Then there's both the, I don't need to go through each of these pieces, I guess, in detail, but just to say you can kind of look at sort of how the distribution of kinds of programs go. What I guess I wanted to focus a little bit on GreenDOT because I think it's interesting as a recovering bureaucrat that what the agency heads have done is to say in all of our decisions now, actually this was the VMT leveling off slide that I wanted to show you, but GreenDOT's mission now is incorporating sustainability in everything that they do. So it's a big agency with a lot of, pardon me, old white men who have not really thought that the environment was their job at all. It's really a cultural shift, like a serious cultural shift. On the good news side, there are a lot of retirements happening. There are a lot of new people being brought in. I don't want to say people aren't educatable, but the evidence has been, it's been very hard. But there's really good management in that group. And so now the requirement is to incorporate thoughts about Global Warming Solutions Act and these goals in everything that they do. And it is really changing some things on a pretty fundamental level. And I just want to say to people that are in this room, there are some big opportunities, I think, for you as you're thinking about new kinds of ways of bringing services and goods to the state. It's a big employer, right? It spends a lot of money, and there's so many things that they need. Jackie, who's here, and I worked together when she was at the British Consulate on the use of information and communications technologies to improve the efficiency of the transportation system, sort of treating the transportation system like it's a system that needs energy efficiency. And those of you in the room who work on energy efficiency, you have tons to share with the transportation agencies about how to think about it, about how to provide incentives. But the work that Jackie and I did was specifically about how to use big data, and they have gotten that message now. They're using it in all kinds of interesting ways. There's a woman named Rachel Bain. If you don't know her, she's just fantastic. She's in charge of innovations and evaluation, and she's using a lot of the real-time data to figure out ways to make the system work better. They are getting there. I think they're really getting there. This is just kind of to think about all the different places where there are energy opportunities, energy efficiency opportunities. And I'll leave this slide for you. I'm running out of time to be able to go through them in detail. But I just want to say that the big problem now, I think the big next thing, and Shelley talked about it beautifully, is really getting our land use right. There's not a big, meaty push to work with cities and towns to the point that they're considering sort of the embedded future energy in their decisions. And there are a few cities and towns, and Cambridge is absolutely one of them, who thinks about it clearly in all of their decisions. But in some of the other cities and towns, that's not yet so. And so coming up with something like, for those of you who are Massachusetts people, something like a Green Communities Act for transportation might be the next thing, which is to give incentives at the same kind of way that we do for efficiency. I also just wanted to say that giving drivers price signals is going to be the other big thing, so that individual decisions, every decision gets included. And there's a conversation going on right now about setting a carbon tax in Massachusetts. It will be very controversial, but it actually does show that it will reduce emissions on the order of 10 to 15%, and it's a revenue neutral carbon tax. So it essentially charges it and then gives money back to people in proportion to sort of each, I don't know how it's going to get implemented, we're making some suggestions, but that each family, each person will get back a rebate every year. But when they're at the pump, they'll be looking at a higher rate. When they're buying electricity, they'll be looking at a higher rate. I don't know if it'll work, but what we've just done from early analysis that was released last week is that it doesn't hurt the economy at all, grows jobs by about 10,000. Not a lot, actually. It's a small increase in jobs, but it actually does really help the transportation sector to get to align things properly. And it's going to be a long discussion. This is just the very beginning part, the first part of the analysis. But I just want to say that having something that begins to put more of a, have people really think through their transportation decisions with a price signal will be really helpful. I think that's all I want to say. Thanks.
Well, thank you very much to all of you, and look forward to getting into the discussion. And I'm going to kick it off with a few questions to the panelists that relate to their presentation. So, Catherine, you started talking about what will the transportation system look like in 2050. And I'd love if you could talk a little bit more about what kind of strategies do we need to employ to get there, and what kind of short-term changes might we be able to experience?
Okay, so let me start at 2050 and back up, okay? So it's Monday morning, and you're going to work, Suzanne. You get up, you get on your phone, you make a call, and 10 minutes later, you open your door, and there's a pod sitting there. Is it levitating above the ground or on the ground? Question mark. You hop in, there's just you, there's no driver, or maybe there are 4 or 5 other people. You say, take me to the office, and it does. Now, the office could be 2 to 3 miles away, and you might have a rubber tire experience, or it might lift those tires up, put down steel wheels, get on rail, or it might levitate you all the way down on the steel track as well. So that's the scenario when we talk about sort of technologies, and we laugh, but what are drones? And what potential do they offer? We don't know where they take us. So I paint that sort of fun, right, to think about what our futures might be. Short term, it's the kind of things we've talked about now, all of us. The big issue is the governance, which Sonia talked about a little bit, and how do we get governments to cooperate? In Georgia right now, you have 159 counties. And every one of them has a county commissioner who thinks that the 2,000 people that he represents are equivalent to the state of Georgia. I'm joking, but not quite. So we have some scaling issues, and I make the argument that there are certain hierarchies. For example, we can identify 10 major engines, mega regions, that explain 90% of all the new patents, 80% of the GDP. They drive our economy. If the transport systems serving them don't work, we don't work. So one of the strategies we need is to establish a hierarchy with resources attached that guarantee our ability to continue to be competitive in some ways and also sustainable. So I think there's some scaling issues, which is why I talked about sort of connected technologies and then the fluidity that allows us, I think, to continue to grow, to continue to be successful. There's lots of governance issues. I spent a lot of time thinking about these. But the other quick comment I'll make is this health piece is terribly important. I just wrote a book, Health Impact Assessment in the US, and it says whether it's a program, a policy, or a project, you can bring health into that issue. And health sells. I mean, it is the most compelling argument one can make. People value it, and it's terribly important. So this energy argument that we're making, we ought to integrate health into it much more than we do now. It's much more of a strategy, let me say, in terms of moving our agenda forward.
Just on that note, that's how sustainable transportation got started in Cambridge, because people were concerned with air pollution. That was the driver for our vehicle trip reduction ordinance back 20 years ago.
Exactly.
Shelley, you spoke eloquently about the California goals and the promises that are embedded in those. And so we always think of California as on the absolute forefront on anything to do with transportation. And can you talk about how this might be applicable and spread to other parts of the U.S. that does not have the history and experiences that California has had?
Georgia, for example.
For example.
Well, one of the things I really didn't get to the time to talk about is the financial side of this. Alongside those regional plans is a cap and trade program, which is projected not the first year, but within about 3 years, to generate $4 billion a year in revenues. 35% of those revenues are to go to implement those plans. On top of that are funds to retrofit buildings, promote electric vehicles. So the 35% of $4 billion a year can go toward incentivizing development to happen around the transit system, building a transit system. And that is the kind of money that speaks. And so part, I think, of the answer is to find the right financial tools and incentives that can get the mayors and those county commissioners interested, because they're going to be able to get their, new transit system or their streets repaired through this fund. The second, I think, is looping back to the EPA carbon pollution standards. Part of the sort of rubric is that states would be expected to come up with plans that show how they're going to meet these targets. And I gotta say, I think that if you start layering in the land use and transportation discussion, tie it to the market and consumer preferences, you could end up with a tremendous win. And so I'm looking at whether or not there's a angle, when we start looking at these statewide plans, could they become the vehicle for creating the integrated decision-making that we actually need in order to make substantial gains on these tracks? So that's, a big if, but this is the time to start thinking about all that.
And Sonia, I'd love if you could talk about what you see as the biggest hindrances or barriers to get to an energy efficient transportation sector. What are the key ones that we need to tackle?
Well, this whole issue of scalability, of how to make decisions at a local level, to build it up into an urban level, all the way up. You were talking about mega regions, the state level and the mega region level, really requires an engagement at by a lot of different people with something of a coordinated vision. And you want to create empowerment at all those different levels. So I feel like a lot of this is the social part of how to bring people in to think of themselves as doers, to think of themselves as part of the solution set in their own communities, so things are being designed that people actually want, and that they're then being funded in fair ways across counties or across states. Providing incentives, we don't have incentives in this area the same way that we do for energy efficiency, as I was just talking about, and instead what we have is kind of project money. We have federal money that comes down as project money. It's not being thought of as a system. We're using old tools for something that I don't think the agencies are set up right for it, at least not right now. In a lot of states, the environment and energy agencies have aligned. One project that I've been working on for about 5 years now is called the Transportation and Climate Initiative. It's run out of the Georgetown Climate Center, and it has brought together the energy, environment, and transportation secretaries or agency heads in the whole Northeast, from Maine down to DC. And the region that's so important is, I remember when we started RGGI, we had the energy and the environment secretaries sitting together for the first time, and they didn't know each other's language at all. They couldn't even talk to each other. And many of them had never met each other before. And for anything related to energy and climate, that's not acceptable. We have to have some common language. So this group has had the energy, transportation, and environment secretaries sitting together. And the transportation secretaries generally don't know the environment secretaries except around permitting, and they don't like them very much. So, I think having people talk to each other, understand each other's language, see the problems in similar ways, in that project, there's an effort to try and set a cap across the whole Northeast for the transportation sector. I don't know if we'll be able to do it, but it is the kind of mega region thinking that I think begins the alignment. And it's going to take alignment. It's almost like dragging a magnet through iron filings. There's a lot of alignment that needs to happen.
Great. Well, thank you for your wonderful presentations and lots of insight. And I think it's time to hear from people out in the audience. And when you ask a question, if you could kindly state your name and your affiliation, we'd appreciate it. And somebody way in the back in the red shirt.
Thank you. My name's Rachel Schlott, and I'm actually with the University of Michigan. So in your discussion about urban areas, I was wondering if you could talk about places like Detroit that really are going through a revitalization, and what opportunities, instead of looking at new cities that are being built, what are kind of the current cities that are having to redefine themselves and look at a renaissance, have you? What opportunities do they have to start addressing smart growth and new transportation methods?
I'll start.
Go for it.
I think they have an excellent chance. In a way, they're starting anew, and they have opportunities, I think, to revisit it sort of at a larger scale than other cities might have. New technology that we talked about ought to be a part of that. We're not trying to build back what we have. That doesn't make a lot of sense. So the question becomes, what do we put back? What do we redevelop? And we've talked about the kinds of characteristics that we need. And of course, this reliance on the automobile has been both the bane of it's been both a blessing and a curse. And now as we have to transition, and not just us, countries all over the world are making this transition. When you talk about this high-speed train investment in China between Beijing and Shanghai, they're not just going for a happy train ride. They're trying to reduce travel time by 50% because it makes them more competitive. They can move people and commodities and ideas in a shorter time. So I think all of those are on the table for those places. I would also say, we should not look at Detroit and think we're off the hook, but for the grace of a lot of things, a lot of cities are very close to the Detroit scenario. Mm-hmm. So this idea of sort of constantly reinvesting and with a different lens, looking at technology, looking at creating a sustainable, high-quality living environment that will continue to attract people. The problem we have is, I give you Atlanta, for example. We've been very fast-growing, we still are, but the investment in infrastructure and technology lags that so much that you never catch up. So it undermines the quality of life, and we've got to fix that. I think these places have maybe, in a way, a better opportunity to do that. Of course, finance, and we know it's going to be a really important part of that. Shelley, you want to make some comments?
Well, I think that one thing that's impressed me an awful lot about Detroit is the effort to demonstrate with real, live, on-the-ground parts of the city what an alternative future might be. And the fact that there are areas that are getting investment. Yeah. The new M1 rail is going to be a really key part of that. And I think we're going to start seeing some tremendous momentum once people can kick the tires, so to speak. And that's actually a big part of, I think, my thinking about how do we get more community leaders to embrace the change.
That's the challenge.
We need to be working bottoms up and top down simultaneously. And we need to have, frankly, in every community, some examples, some real places that people can experience that show the benefits. We're starting to see that accumulate across the country in the high marketplaces. There's certainly a lot of that. I think we're getting the whiplash to displacement, frankly, and price increases that are making it so that people are getting knocked out of those neighborhoods. And that's a new set of challenges we have to really dig in on. But I agree. I think that a place like Detroit can really show a new way. And I also agree there are many, many, many cities across the US that are on the brink of bankruptcy. And this is going to become a tidal wave, in my opinion.
The question in the back in the blue jacket.
Amy Glassmeyer, and hello, Catherine.
Hi, Amy.
How you doing?
Good to see you.
I'll
We're
catch
good
you
friends.
later. The point that was just made is one that I think is certainly on my mind, and that is we're in a period of low growth in the industrialized economies. And whether it's the result of the evening out of wages across the world as a result of globalization or a low-level technological equilibrium, nobody knows. There's a million possible explanations. But the options that we're describing to gain full force and to support society has to be connected to models of economic development that integrates people who are currently not integrated or are on the verge of not being integrated. So I'm curious, and the last speaker commented on we have to be worried about displacement. Well, we have to be worried about how we turn this opportunity into a domestic import substitution engine of growth so that we connect the people who live in the communities we're talking about to the job generation capacity. And we have a lot of experience with doing that, but it really does take mindful political decision-making to say, yes, there is a corporation over here, but yes, there's also a corporation here. So have you any thoughts about how do we actually start the game with the right set of rules and then actually play it according to the rules as we go forward, if we set them?
Anyone would like to speak to that?
Well, I'll just quickly say I couldn't agree more. And I think that I'm really glad you used the term mindful. I don't think that we're going to achieve the accrual of benefits to everyone unless we are intentional and mindful. And it's going to take more than just unlocking the market. And I am hopeful in that because in my role working for the federal government during the first term of the Obama administration, I got to visit people all over the country. And I think there is a deep understanding among civic leaders that we need new approaches. One of the things that I was able to do that I'm really proud of is fund and support the capacity of multi-sector partnerships in 145 cities and regions across the country. So for the first time, I think, having the resources to bring public, private, civic sector together and create that shared vision you were talking about, but also try and really sort through who can best help solve these problems. We need to all play a role in it, and it can't just be government.
Amy, just a comment. I worry a lot about this displacement, but I worry about, technology is a very interesting, it presents some interesting opportunities and challenges. Because it's not just those who are displaced, it's those who are going to be. I think that's an ever-widening pool. I don't think we're very mindful. We sort of see technology and we don't ask the other questions, the one you just put on the table, for example. So a lot of us, we don't ever see it, but conceivably, we could be displaced at any point in time. So, you think you're riding on the top now, and tomorrow, disruptive innovation says, oh no, we have another place for you. Not that it's out, you may get 3 or 4, whatever it is. But my point is, I think it's a part of our discussion in our country that we have not had, do not have. And not just for us, but it's a very, very critical one because that's why the linking the economic piece into it is so important. That's why I referenced that. I think we can't take that off of the table. It's sort of at what cost and at what price and what are we willing to pay.
And another issue that we discussed a little bit is with all these new private services that are springing up in technology-driven transportation solutions that are super great if you have a smartphone and you you can afford the cost of the privatized service. But if you're not able, if you can't participate, you might see a lesser expansion of the public transportation network because there's all these private services that are filling the gap, but that may not be great for all of us. So it's another angle on that question. I think we have time for another question. Lady right here in the hat.
Hi, I'm Kate DeWolf. I just finished an energy contract at Hanscom Air Force Base, which is a military base about 15 miles from here. And while I was at Hanscom, some representatives from DOE contacted Hanscom about installing a public hydrogen fueling station. And they showed us a map with proposed hydrogen fueling stations dotted around the Boston area. And this was new to me, so I'd like to hear what's the plan for hydrogen cars? How does this work?
I know just enough to be dangerous on this. I don't know what the plans are for Massachusetts, but I do know that in California, hydrogen stations are being put up. There's quite a network of them in California. And the vehicles are very expensive right now, but they're coming, I think. I don't know if they're going to be the answer for everybody, but the hydrogen fuel cell vehicles seem to be extremely clean, and I think when the technology's a little bit more developed and marketed, I think we'll like them. They're very powerful cars. They're very good cars. There are people in this room that know the answer more than I do, so I feel silly saying more than that.
I think you gave the answer.
They're coming.
I think it's coming.
I think we have time for one more question. I think you had, let's go right here. Let's go to you.
I will confess I was kind of hoping you wouldn't go to me because I'm going to ask a very unpopular question. So should I say my name? I'm Marcia Walker, and I'm going to ask about the elephant in the room because if anyone knows the answer to the question, it's probably someone in this room. The slide that showed population growth of 100 million, what was it, by 2050, really impacted me. And about 5 years ago, I was in a room talking about industrial energy efficiency, and they had an equation that said population growth of X, energy use of Y, carbon emissions of Z, therefore we must reduce energy use. And I looked at the equation and I'm like, I'm not a mathematician, but the biggest variable in that equation was population growth. Is anybody researching policies or ideas or impact of population growth on energy use? Anyone looking at that? I know it's an unpopular topic to discuss.
Yeah, but I think they're more separate than you just put it. I think demographers have spent a whole lot of time. We've done a lot of population projections for every county in the United States to the year 2050 to see who's going to do what as far as we can tell, right?
Treating it as a fixed variable and not something that can be altered?
No. It's something that can be altered, so you can run different scenarios for addressing that. But the point that I'm making is I don't think it's linked explicitly to the question that you're asking, which is sort of what are the energy implications of that, and how do we begin to have policy to respond to that. I think that's what this whole debate is really about. Underlying all of this is we are going to grow. We are going to have to provide more energy. We're going to use more energy. That's why the clean energy issue is so important. So it seems to me the way to advance that is to link those as you've just done it in terms of new policy development. But I don't think they're enough linked as we currently are investigating it, would be my observation.
I would just add, and I'm way outside of my professional life and more into what I read after work, but there are various ways of looking at population, what happens to population after 2050. There's a very interesting book called 2052, which was written by someone who was part of the team that wrote Limits to Growth. And he's decided to take another look from 2012 and out to 40 years because it was previous 40 years. And he says his view is that population starts leveling off after 2050 for reasons that have to do with how societies develop, what choices people make about the number of children they're having, et cetera, et cetera. So there isn't, I wouldn't say there's necessarily a universal belief that we're just looking at a continuous upward trend line. just another thought on that.
The other issue is we age, and we are sort of the aging leader among industrialized nations. Is what happens to energy consumption in that whole process? Again, that's something I think is on the table. We don't know a lot about it.
So I think with that, we're out of time. And if you can help me thank the panelists.